The second type of supply-side policy that we'll look at is what is called market-based or market-oriented supply-side policies. Remember, these are based in a lot of the same concepts that we learned in microeconomics, that through the forces of demand and supply, that allocative efficiency will be reached, and that things will be better for both consumers and producers, and community surplus and things like that will be maximized. Since it's macro, then we would say that would happen in all the markets together, so community surplus overall in all the markets would be maximized. We often talk about freeing up the market so that market forces, demand and supply, getting rid of surplus and shortages, the price function, the incentives function of price, signaling. So all those things can work, so we free those up. The problem is, and this will be a running theme throughout, remember, the market fails. So if we free up the market, do we also then free it up to fail even more than it would without government intervention? And that's the major problem that we see with a lot of our market-based supply-side policies. Let's start with some basics here, and let's go back to the diagram. So, if we see a supply-side policy happening, and we see both long-run and short-run aggregate supply move to the right, let's examine what happens to our, in light of our 4 macroeconomic objectives. Well, we see the price level has dropped, so that's the second objective. We got that done. We see that real GDP has gone from 20 to 35. I'm going to use those numbers over here. So we've got economic growth, so that's our third economic objective. And if we're producing more, unemployment also has to be less because this was YFE and now we've moved beyond YFE. It might be a new YFE, but bottom line is that the growth that we see here would be faster than the growth of the labor force. So we have less unemployment. The problem is that we probably are not going to get a more equitable distribution of income. And that's going to be the sticking point for a lot of people, that even if we get those other 3, the cost that it comes at, making income distribution or the wealth gap in a country more unequal, that cost is not okay, and that's why it often doesn't sit well with people. Let's go ahead and examine this 4th macroeconomic objective. These are our 5 quintiles of the population for the Lorenz curve or the Gini coefficient. And let's say that this is where we start, where the poorest fifth is making €1, 2, 3, 4, and then the highest fifth is making 10 euros. So that's a grand total or national income of 20, and the top quintile has 50% of that down to 5%. You can check my math if you'd like. Well, let's look what happens, or let's see what happens in the situation here where we went from a GDP of 20 to a GDP of 35. If it goes this way, where this person's doubles, this person goes up by 2, this person goes up by 1.5, and 1, and 0.5, well, where many people would focus on is that for no person here did they get worse off. We're talking about real prices here, so real income, and if this is true, nobody here is worse than they were before. But in Gini terms, based on the Lorenz curve, we would see that because 5% went down to 4%, 10 went to 9, so on and so forth, and this one went up from 50 to 57, well, basically the richest 20% of society is getting the lion's share of the increase. And that just doesn't sit well with a lot of people. So we would see the Gini coefficient in this case get worse, which means it would become a bigger number. Well, like I said, this really becomes very much a moral or an ethical argument, because based on this right here, it would be hard to say that everyone's life getting better is a bad thing. Yet, like I said, this is a very controversial topic. We saw this practiced most often by Ronald Reagan. He's the US president from 1980 to 1988. And Margaret Thatcher is the British Prime Minister. I think she's appointed in 1983 and serves around the same amount of time. If you look at both of them, there are people who are on both sides of the fence. Many people think these two are great, and probably more people really don't like them. Funny story, I was looking for some data about Thatcher, and just did a Google search, and apparently, so it's May 17th today, I think, of 2015, and I guess it was April 20th, so under a month ago, Madonna on her Twitter feed posted a picture of Margaret Thatcher and a Margaret Thatcher quote, and it was it was admirable. She was saying, oh look, this is a great quote by Margaret Thatcher. Well, so apparently Madonna got so many so much negative feedback to that tweet that she pulled it and deleted the tweet within a few hours or a day or something like that. My point of telling you that is that this is still very much a hotbed issue, and people have very divided opinions and very emotional responses to these policies. If you don't believe me, Google search Reagan and air traffic controllers, we'll talk about them more later, or Thatcher and the coal miners, or milk, or whatever, and you'll see the milk thing we won't talk about. Basically, Margaret Thatcher took milk out of school lunches. Kids were getting milk in their school lunches, and she said, nope, that's too expensive, let's get rid of that. Well, that doesn't fit well with, a lot of the things that we talked about in the previous video about ideas of human capital and things like that. So ultimately the debate comes down to, is 3 out of 4 an acceptable number? Yes, we got this, this, and this, but income distribution got worse. Couldn't we have still gotten these 3 with this person not doubling their income? If they were making at least 2.5 times as much as everybody else, did they really need that much more? Well, that's a question that's hard to answer, because the argument is the people who are up here are creating all the growth, and the reason they want to create the growth is their own desire to make themselves more wealthy, more better off. This goes back to, in micro, we talked about the invisible hand. If you're a Wall Street fan, this is Gordon Gekko in his Greed is Good speech. But essentially that's what we're getting to is that okay for the person who already has the most to profit more than everyone else, even if they're all profiting as well, even if they're all getting better as well? Obviously, if some of these people are getting worse, then that's pretty hard to defend morally. I think the other question, though, is a little bit more difficult to understand. Obviously, this is very associated with the neoclassical or monetarist point of view. Milton Friedman, who is kind of the guy credited with monetarism, he often talks about, if you go listen to speeches from him, he often talks about how capitalism is the most responsible force, or has lifted the most amount of people out of poverty in all of history. And he's probably right, but there's still that question of, well, yeah, it's lifted a bunch of people out of poverty, but not everyone, and certainly not to the same level. And you have all these other people who are getting just more and more and more wealthy. And again, it's just a hard topic to come to a firm conclusion on. We'll talk about it more in class.